The gunshot that killed Daisy's father echoed through the canyon walls like a death knell, and she knew in that instant that her life as she had known it was over. She ran through the darkness of that Colorado night in 1878, her worn boots slipping on loose stones as she fled from the men who had murdered her father over a mining claim he refused to sell. The moonlight barely illuminated her path as she stumbled into the first barn she could find, 3 miles outside of Julesburg, collapsing into the hay with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Daisy Lancaster was 22 years old, and she had just watched 3 men shoot her father in cold blood outside their small cabin. They had wanted the silver claim her father had been working for the past 2 years, a modest operation that had finally started showing promise. When he refused their offer, insisting the land was his legal right, they had simply drawn their weapons. She had been coming back from the well when she heard the argument escalate, and she had hidden behind the woodpile as the shots rang out. The moment they went inside the cabin, presumably to search for the claim documents, she had run. Now, huddled in the musty darkness of a stranger's barn, she tried to control her ragged breathing. She could hear horses in the stalls nearby, their occasional snorts and shuffles, the only sound besides her own racing pulse. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hands scratched and bleeding from her frantic flight through the brush. She knew those men would come looking for her. She was a witness, and more than that, she was the legal heir to her father's claim. They would not rest until they found her. The first night was the longest of her life. She barely slept, starting at every sound, convinced that each creak of wood was a footstep, each rustle of hay was someone approaching to finish what they had started. When dawn finally broke, pale light filtering through the gaps in the barn walls, she realized she had to make a plan. She could not simply walk into town and report what had happened. The 3 men who killed her father were known to work for Silas Chambers, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the territory. His mining operations stretched across half of Colorado, and he had judges, sheriffs, and politicians in his pocket. Her word against his men would mean nothing, and she would likely end up dead before she could even testify. So Daisy stayed hidden. She found a spot in the hayloft where the bales were stacked in such a way that they created a small hollow, invisible from below. During the day, she would peek through the gaps in the boards, watching the farmhouse in the distance. She saw a woman hanging laundry, children playing in the yard, a man working on a fence. They seemed like a normal family, going about their daily lives, unaware that a desperate fugitive was hiding in their barn. At night, when the family was asleep, Daisy would creep down from the loft to steal what she needed to survive. She took eggs from the chicken coop, being careful to leave enough that the family would not notice. She found a barrel of apples stored in the barn and would take 1 or 2 at a time. There was a water pump behind the barn, and she would fill a tin cup she had found, drinking deeply before retreating back to her hiding place. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Daisy's dress became filthy, her hair tangled and matted. She longed for a proper bath, for clean clothes, for the simple comfort of sleeping in a real bed. But more than anything, she wanted her father back. In the quiet hours, grief would overwhelm her, and she would sob silently into the hay, mourning the only family she had left in the world. She knew she could not stay in this barn forever. Eventually, she would be discovered, or she would run out of food to steal, or winter would come and she would freeze. But every time she thought about leaving, about trying to make it to Denver or Santa Fe where she might find help, she remembered the look in those men's eyes as they shot her father. Cold, calculating, ruthless. They would have people watching the roads, the stage stations, the train depot. How could she possibly escape? On the 8th day, she moved to a different barn. She had seen a neighboring property about 2 miles away, and under cover of darkness she made her way there. This barn was smaller, more run down, and it appeared to belong to a bachelor who lived alone in a tiny cabin. She found a hiding spot behind some old farm equipment and settled in, going through the same routine of stealing food at night and hiding during the day. Then she moved again. And again. She became a ghost, flitting from barn to barn, never staying more than a few days in one place. She learned to move silently, to take only what would not be missed, to leave no trace of her presence. Her face became gaunt, her body thin from the meager rations she could scavenge. She stopped counting the days, existing in a fog of fear and exhaustion. It was in the 5th barn, 3 weeks after her father's murder, that her luck ran out. She had been careless. The owner of this particular barn was a rancher who kept unusual hours, and she had not noticed his pattern. She was down from the loft in the early morning, drinking from a bucket of water meant for the horses, when she heard the barn door swing open. Panic seized her, and she dropped the ladle, the clatter echoing through the space. She turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. The man stood in the doorway, backlit by the rising sun, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Well," he said, his voice deep and measured, "I have been wondering who was stealing my eggs." Daisy's throat closed with terror. She pressed herself against the wall, looking for any avenue of escape. But he was blocking the main door, and the barn had no other exits large enough for her to fit through. The man took a step forward, and she could finally see his face. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard for a living. His hair was dark, almost black, and fell just past his collar. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with strong features and piercing blue eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. He wore typical rancher's clothing, denim pants, a plain shirt, a leather vest, and a gun belt at his hip. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. "Please," Daisy managed to whisper, "please do not hurt me." His expression shifted, surprise replacing the initial wariness. "Hurt you? Miss, I'm not in the habit of hurting women, but I would like to know why you are living in my barn and stealing my food." She could not answer. Her voice failed her, and she just stood there, trembling, waiting for him to draw his gun or call for the sheriff or do whatever it was he planned to do. Instead, he raised his hands slowly, showing her his palms in a gesture of peace. "Easy now. You look like you have been through hell. Why do not you come up to the house, get cleaned up, have a proper meal, and then you can tell me what trouble you are running from?" "I cannot," she said, finding her voice. "They will find me. They will kill me like they killed my father." His eyes narrowed, and she saw his jaw tighten. "Who will kill you?" "Silas Chambers' men. They murdered my father for his mining claim. I saw it happen. If they find me, I am dead." The man was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he nodded slowly. "My name is Xavier Frost. This is my ranch, and I give you my word that no one will hurt you while you are under my protection. Now, come on. You look like you have not had a decent meal in weeks." Daisy wanted to trust him. Every fiber of her being was crying out for help, for safety, for someone to tell her that everything would be all right. But trust had become a foreign concept to her in the past 3 weeks. "How do I know you will not turn me in? Silas Chambers has money, influence. Everyone in this territory is afraid of him." Xavier's expression hardened. "Silas Chambers is a snake, and I do not do business with snakes. 5 years ago, he tried to buy my land for a fraction of what it was worth. When I refused, his men burned down my barn and killed half my herd. I rebuilt, hired more hands, and made it clear that the next time his men set foot on my property, they would leave in pine boxes. We have had an understanding ever since." There was something in his voice, a core of steel beneath the measured tone, that made Daisy believe him. She saw the truth in his eyes, and she felt the first stirring of hope she had experienced since that terrible night. "My name is Daisy Lancaster," she said softly. "Well, Miss Lancaster, hiding is over. Come on." Those words, spoken with such certainty and authority, broke something inside her. The walls she had built around herself to survive the past weeks crumbled, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She slid down the wall and sat in the dirt, her face in her hands, unable to stop the flood of emotion. Xavier crossed the barn in 3 long strides and knelt beside her. He did not touch her, respecting her space, but his presence was solid and reassuring. "It is all right," he said quietly. "You are safe now. I promise you, you are safe." When she finally managed to compose herself, he helped her to her feet and led her out of the barn. The morning sun was bright, and she had to shield her eyes after so many days in darkness. His ranch house was a well-built structure of logs and stone, larger than she had expected. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could smell coffee brewing. Inside, the house was clean and surprisingly well appointed. There was a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and what appeared to be 2 bedrooms off to the side. Xavier directed her to a chair at the kitchen table and poured her a cup of coffee from a pot on the stove. "When is the last time you ate?" he asked. "I have been eating," she said defensively. "Eggs, apples, whatever I could find." "When is the last time you had a hot meal?" She could not remember. The night before her father died, they had made stew. That felt like a lifetime ago. Xavier did not wait for an answer. He moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, and within minutes he was frying bacon and eggs, cutting thick slices of bread from a fresh loaf. He set a plate in front of her, piled high with food, and she stared at it as if she had never seen such abundance. "Eat," he said. "Then we will figure out what to do about Silas Chambers." She ate slowly at first, afraid her stomach would rebel after weeks of near starvation, but the food was so good that she could not help herself. She finished everything on her plate, and Xavier silently gave her more. She ate that too. When she was finally full, the exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She swayed in her chair, and Xavier caught her arm to steady her. "You need sleep," he said. "Real sleep, in a real bed. The room at the end of the hall is yours. There's a wash basin and clean water. I will get you some clothes that might fit, belonged to my sister before she got married and moved to California. Get yourself cleaned up and rest. We can talk more this afternoon." "What if someone comes looking for me?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Let them come," Xavier said simply. "This is my land, and I decide who is welcome here. Now go on before you fall asleep sitting up." The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in a patchwork quilt. There was a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and Xavier brought in a bucket of warm water and a stack of clean clothes. When he left, closing the door behind him, Daisy stripped off her filthy dress and washed herself as best she could. The water turned gray with dirt, and she had to refill the basin twice before she felt truly clean. The clothes Xavier had given her were simple but well made, a cotton dress in a soft blue color, undergarments, and even a pair of stockings. They fit reasonably well, though his sister had apparently been a bit taller than Daisy. She combed out her tangled hair with a brush she found on the dresser, wincing as she worked through the knots. Finally, she lay down on the bed, intending to rest for just a few minutes. The moment her head touched the pillow, she was asleep. When she woke, the light coming through the window was different, and she realized with a start that it was late afternoon. She had slept for hours. Panic seized her briefly. Where was she? What had happened? But then memory returned. Xavier Frost. The ranch. Safety. She got up and ventured out of the bedroom. Xavier was sitting at the kitchen table, going over what looked like account books. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "You look better," he said. "How do you feel?" "Like a human being again," she admitted. "Thank you. For everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You can start by telling me exactly what happened," Xavier said. "The whole story from the beginning. If we are going up against Silas Chambers, I need to know what we are dealing with." So Daisy told him. She told him about her father, Jacob Lancaster, who had come to Colorado 5 years ago after her mother died of consumption back in Ohio. She told him about the silver claim, how her father had filed all the proper paperwork and worked the claim legally. She told him about the 3 men who had come to their cabin that night, how they had offered money for the claim, how her father had refused, and how they had shot him down when he tried to order them off his property. "I hid behind the woodpile," she said, her voice shaking. "I saw their faces. I heard what they said. One of them was called Dutch, a big man with a red beard. Another was younger, could not have been more than 20. They called him Kid. The third one was older, seemed to be in charge. Dutch called him Blackwell." Xavier's expression had grown darker as she spoke, and now it was positively stormy. "Ray Blackwell," he said. "He is Chambers' right-hand man, handles all his dirty work. If Blackwell was there, you can bet your life that Chambers ordered the hit himself." "What can I do?" Daisy asked desperately. "Even if I go to the sheriff, Chambers owns him. There's no justice for someone like me against someone like him." "The sheriff in Julesburg, yes. Chambers has him in his pocket," Xavier agreed. "But the territorial marshal is a different story. His name is Sam Garrett, and he is as honest as they come. If we can get word to him, if we can get you somewhere safe until he can investigate, then maybe we have a chance." "Where is the marshal?" Daisy asked. Denver, most likely. Maybe Fort Collins. He rides circuit through the territory dealing with cases that local law cannot or will not handle. How long would it take to get word to him? Xavier considered. A week? Maybe 2, depending on where he is and how fast the telegraph can reach him. The problem is keeping you hidden and safe until he gets here. Chambers' men will be turning over every rock looking for you. I can go back to hiding in barns, Daisy said, though the thought filled her with dread. No, Xavier said firmly. You will stay here with me. I have ranch hands, good men who are loyal and can keep their mouths shut. We will tell them you are my cousin from back east, here to visit. No one will question it. That puts you in danger, Daisy protested. If Chambers finds out you are hiding me. Let me worry about Chambers, Xavier said. His hand moved unconsciously to the gun at his hip. I've been waiting for an excuse to take that bastard down for 5 years. This might be just the opportunity I need. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Xavier sent one of his most trusted ranch hands, a grizzled old cowboy named Pete, to Denver with a message for Marshal Garrett. The message was coded, vague enough that if it was intercepted it would not immediately give away Daisy's location, but clear enough that the marshal would understand the urgency. In the meantime, Daisy stayed at the ranch. Xavier introduced her to his other hands as his cousin, and if any of them doubted the story, they were too polite or too smart to say anything. The men were respectful, keeping their distance and tipping their hats when they passed her. She helped around the house, cooking meals and tidying up, grateful to have something to occupy her hands and her mind. Xavier was gone during the day, working the ranch, but he always returned in the evening. They would have dinner together, and afterward they would sit by the fireplace and talk. Daisy learned that Xavier had been born in Texas, that his family had owned a small ranch there before losing it to a corrupt land deal. He had come to Colorado at 18, worked as a ranch hand for 10 years, and saved every penny until he could buy his own land. He had built his ranch from nothing, and he was fiercely protective of it. In turn, Daisy told him about her life before Colorado, about growing up in Ohio, about her mother who had loved music and taught her to play the piano, about her father who had been a school teacher before the wanderlust and the promise of silver had drawn him west. Do you think Marshal Garrett will come? Daisy asked one evening, about a week after Pete had left for Denver. He will come, Xavier said with confidence. Garrett is a man of honor. If he receives that message, he will investigate. And then what? Even if I testify, even if Chambers' men are arrested, what happens to me? I have no home, no family, no way to support myself. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. You could stay here, he said finally. You are welcome to stay as long as you need, longer if you want. There was something in his voice, an undertone she could not quite identify, that made her heart beat a little faster. She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized for the first time how handsome he was. It was not just his physical appearance, though that was certainly appealing. It was the strength in him, the quiet competence, the way he moved through the world with absolute certainty. He was the kind of man you could build a life with, the kind of man who would stand beside you when the world fell apart. And she realized with a start that she was falling for him. The thought terrified her. It had only been a few weeks since her father's death. How could she even think about romance at a time like this? It seemed almost disrespectful to her father's memory. But she could not deny what she was feeling. Xavier had saved her life, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. He had given her hope when she had none, safety when she was hunted, and kindness when she was at her lowest. That is very generous, she said softly. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me. You would have survived, Xavier said, meeting her eyes. You are stronger than you think, Daisy Lancaster. Not many people could have lasted 3 weeks on the run, living in barns, stealing food to stay alive. You did what you had to do. That takes courage. I do not feel very courageous, she admitted. Most of the time I feel terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear, Xavier said. It is moving forward despite the fear. And you have been doing that since the night your father died. They talked late into the night, and when Daisy finally went to bed, she lay awake for a long time, thinking about Xavier, about her father, about the uncertain future that lay ahead. The next day, everything changed. Daisy was in the kitchen, making bread, when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She froze, her hands covered in flour, and looked out the window. 4 men were riding up to the house, and even from a distance she recognized one of them. Dutch, the big man with the red beard who had shot her father. Terror flooded through her, and she dropped the bowl she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but she barely noticed. She ran to the window and saw Xavier coming out of the barn, alerted by the sound of the horses. He moved casually, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his gun. She should hide. That was her first instinct. But if she hid and they searched the house, they would find her, and then Xavier would be in danger too. So instead, she stayed at the window, watching, her heart in her throat. The men reined in their horses about 20 feet from where Xavier stood. Dutch was in the lead, with 3 other men Daisy did not recognize flanking him. They all wore guns, and they all looked dangerous. "Help you, gentlemen?" Xavier asked, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "We are looking for someone," Dutch said. His voice was rough, with a southern accent. "A woman. Young, dark hair, might be on the run. You seen anyone like that?" "Cannot say that I have," Xavier said easily. "Why? What did she do?" "That is none of your concern," Dutch said. "We just need to find her. There is a reward, $500 for information leading to her whereabouts." $500, Xavier said, as if considering it. "That's a lot of money. Who is offering the reward?" "Mr. Silas Chambers," Dutch said. "You know who he is, I reckon." "I know who he is," Xavier said, and there was ice in his voice now. "And I know he is not welcome on my land. So I will ask you once, politely, to leave." Dutch's expression hardened. "Now, that is not very neighborly. We are just trying to do our job. Maybe we should take a look around, make sure you are not harboring any fugitives." "You have 2 choices," Xavier said, and his hand moved to rest on the butt of his gun. "You can leave now, on your horses, or you can leave later draped across them. Your choice." For a long moment nobody moved. Daisy held her breath, certain that violence was about to erupt. But then Dutch laughed, though it was a cold, humorless sound. "You are making a mistake, Frost," he said. "You do not want to be on Mr. Chambers' bad side." "I have been on Chambers' bad side for years," Xavier said. "Now get off my land." Dutch stared at him for another moment, then turned his horse. "Come on, boys, we have other places to check." As they rode away, he called back over his shoulder, "This is not over, Frost, not by a long shot." Xavier watched them until they were out of sight, then turned and strode quickly back to the house. He found Daisy standing in the kitchen, shaking. "They are looking for me," she said unnecessarily. "They will come back. They will bring more men. Xavier, I have to leave. I'm putting you in danger." "You're not going anywhere," Xavier said firmly. He took her by the shoulders, gently but insistently, making her look at him. "Listen to me. Those men are bullies and murderers, but they are also cowards. They will not come back here unless they are sure they have the advantage. And by the time they are sure, Marshal Garrett will be here." "You do not know that," Daisy said desperately. "What if Pete did not find him? What if he does not come in time?" "Then we deal with it," Xavier said. "But you are not running. Not anymore. I meant what I said before. Hiding is over." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It was not just determination she saw there, but something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Why are you risking everything for me?" Xavier was silent for a moment, his hands still on her shoulders, his face close to hers. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because I cannot bear the thought of anything happening to you." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Daisy was acutely aware of how close he was, of the warmth of his hands through the thin fabric of her dress, of the way his eyes searched hers. "Xavier," she whispered, but she did not know what else to say. He released her abruptly, stepping back, and she felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing. "I need to talk to the men," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Make sure everyone is alert. You stay in the house away from the windows. If you hear shooting, you get into the cellar and you stay there until I come for you. Understood?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Xavier left and Daisy sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. She put her head in her hands, overwhelmed by everything that was happening. Fear for her safety, grief for her father, and now these new, confusing feelings for Xavier, all swirled together until she could barely think straight. But she could not afford to fall apart. She had to be strong, for her father's memory, for herself, and for Xavier, who was putting his life on the line for her. She cleaned up the broken bowl and finished making the bread, needing the familiar activity to calm her nerves. By the time Xavier returned that evening, the house smelled of fresh-baked bread and the stew she had made for dinner. They ate in tense silence, both of them on edge, waiting for something to happen. But the night passed quietly, and the next day as well. No more riders came to the ranch. It was as if Chambers' men had simply disappeared. "It is too quiet," Xavier said on the third day after Dutch's visit. "They are planning something." "Maybe they have moved on," Daisy suggested hopefully. "Maybe they are searching somewhere else." But Xavier shook his head. "Chambers does not give up that easily. No, they are planning something. I can feel it." That night, Daisy could not sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled, and she heard the restless movements of the horses in the barn. Every sound seemed amplified, threatening. Finally, she gave up on sleep and got up, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She padded quietly out to the main room, intending to make some tea, but stopped when she saw Xavier sitting by the fireplace. He had not gone to bed either. He was sitting in a chair, his gun on the table beside him, staring into the dying embers. "Could not sleep either?" she asked softly. He looked up, and in the dim light, she could see the tension in his face. "No, something feels wrong. I do not know what, but I can feel it in my bones." Daisy sat down in the chair across from him. "Do you ever wish you had not found me in your barn? That you had just sent me on my way?" "No," Xavier said immediately. "Not once, not for a single second." "Even though it has brought you nothing but trouble?" "Daisy," he said, leaning forward, his eyes intense in the firelight, "you have not brought me trouble. You have brought me purpose. For 5 years I have been living out here alone, working my ranch, keeping to myself. It has been a good life, a safe life, but it has also been empty. And then you came along and suddenly I have something worth fighting for again." Her breath caught. "Xavier." "I know the timing is terrible," he continued, the words coming faster now, as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is me complicating things. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. I am falling for you, Daisy. Hell, I think I have been falling for you since the moment I found you in my barn, scared and brave and refusing to give up." Daisy felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I thought I was the only one," she said shakily. "I thought I was losing my mind, feeling this way when my father has only been gone for a few weeks. But Xavier, when I look at you, when you are near me, I feel safe. I feel like maybe everything is going to be all right, and I think that is what falling in love feels like." Xavier stood and crossed to her in 2 strides. He knelt before her chair and took her hands in his. "We will get through this," he said fiercely. "I promise you we will get through this, and when it is over, when Chambers and his men are behind bars, I want to spend every day making you happy, if you will let me." "Yes," Daisy said, not even needing to think about it. "Yes, I want that too." He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled over onto her cheeks. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and tentative, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid strength of him. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "I've wanted to do that for days," Xavier admitted, his voice rough. "So have I," Daisy whispered. They sat together by the fire for the rest of the night, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Xavier kept his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling safer than she had in weeks. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Xavier finally stirred. "I should go check on the men," he said reluctantly. "Make sure everything's quiet." Daisy nodded, but as he stood to leave, she caught his hand. "Be careful," she said. He squeezed her hand. "Always." He had been gone for perhaps an hour when Daisy heard the thunder of hoofbeats. She ran to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. At least a dozen men were riding hard toward the ranch house, and at their head was a man she had never seen before, but instinctively knew must be Silas Chambers himself. Chambers was a big man, well dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the rough Colorado landscape. He had silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, and even from a distance there was an air of authority and menace about him. Daisy saw Xavier emerge from the barn, saw him take in the approaching riders, saw his hand move to his gun. But he was outnumbered at least 6-1. Even if his ranch hands helped, they would be overwhelmed. She had to do something. Before she could second-guess herself, Daisy ran to the door and threw it open. She stepped out onto the porch, drawing every eye to her. "I am here," she called out, her voice shaking but carrying across the yard. "I am Daisy Lancaster, and I am the one you are looking for. Leave these men alone. They have nothing to do with this." Chambers reined in his horse and smiled, but it was a cold, cruel expression. Well, well, the little bird has decided to show herself. How considerate. Xavier was striding toward the house, his face furious. "Daisy, get back inside," he ordered. "No," she said, keeping her eyes on Chambers. "This ends now. You wanted me, you have me. Just leave this ranch and these people alone." "I am afraid it is not that simple," Chambers said, dismounting with the ease of a man who spent a lot of time in the saddle. "You see, Miss Lancaster, you are a witness to a crime. And witnesses have a way of causing problems for men like me. I cannot have you running to the authorities with your wild accusations." "They are not accusations," Daisy said, her anger overcoming her fear. "Your men murdered my father in cold blood. I saw it happen. I saw Ray Blackwell give the order." Chambers' expression hardened. "You should have stayed hidden, girl. You should have run far away and never looked back. Instead, you have made yourself a problem that needs to be solved." "The only problem here is you," Xavier said, moving to stand beside Daisy on the porch. "You and your hired killers, and your problems are about to get a whole lot worse." "Is that a fact?" Chambers said, amused. "You are outnumbered, Frost. You and your cowboys do not stand a chance against my men. So here is what is going to happen. You're going to hand over Miss Lancaster, and in return, I will let you and your men live. I will even pay you for your trouble. Say, $1,000 for your inconvenience." "Go to hell," Xavier said flatly. Chambers sighed as if disappointed. "I was afraid you would say that. Very well. Boys, take the girl. Kill anyone who gets in your way." The world seemed to slow down. Chambers' men drew their guns and started to advance. Xavier drew his gun in a smooth, lightning-fast motion and fired, dropping the closest man before he had even fully raised his weapon. Daisy heard shouting from the direction of the bunkhouse as Xavier's ranch hands came running, their own guns drawn. Xavier grabbed Daisy and shoved her back into the house. "Sell her now!" he shouted. "Go!" But before she could move, the shooting started in earnest. The windows exploded inward as bullets tore through them. Xavier returned fire, and Daisy heard someone scream in pain outside. The room filled with smoke and the deafening roar of gunfire. Daisy dropped to the floor, covering her head with her arms, terrified beyond measure. She heard Xavier cursing, heard him reload, heard more shots. This could not be happening. They were going to die here, all of them, because she had been too stubborn to keep running. Then she heard a new sound, one that cut through the chaos like a knife. The sound of a horn, loud and clear, and more hoofbeats, many more. "United States Marshal!" someone shouted. "Drop your weapons!" The gunfire stuttered to a halt. Daisy risked a glance up and saw Xavier standing by the window, his gun still drawn, staring out in disbelief. She scrambled to her feet and looked out to see at least 20 men in badges surrounding the ranch house. At their head was a tall, lean man with a handlebar mustache and a silver star on his chest. Marshal Sam Garrett had arrived. What happened next was almost anticlimactic. Chambers' men, seeing they were now hopelessly outnumbered and surrounded by federal lawmen, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Silas Chambers himself tried to bluster, claiming he had been misinformed, that this was all a misunderstanding, that he was a respectable businessman. But Marshal Garrett was not having any of it. "Save it for the judge, Chambers," he said coldly. "I have been investigating you for months, and I finally have enough evidence to put you away for a long time. The attempted murder of Miss Lancaster here is just the icing on the cake." "You have no proof," Chambers snarled. "It is her word against mine." "Actually, I have plenty of proof," Garrett said. including a signed confession from one Ray Blackwell, who decided that he would rather testify against you than hang for murder. He has given us everything, Chambers, every illegal deal, every claim you stole, every man you had killed. You are done. Chambers' face went purple with rage, but he was smart enough not to resist as two deputies clapped him in irons. Dutch and the other men who had killed Jacob Lancaster were arrested as well, and Garrett assured Daisy that they would all face trial for murder. When the prisoners had been secured and loaded into wagons, Garrett finally turned his attention to Daisy and Xavier. "I got your message," he said to Xavier, shaking his hand. "Sorry it took so long to get here. I was up in the mountains on another case. But when I heard that Chambers was making a move, I gathered as many men as I could and rode hard. Glad we got here in time." "So are we," Xavier said dryly. "Marshal, this is Daisy Lancaster. She is the witness to Jacob Lancaster's murder." "Miss Lancaster," Garrett said, tipping his hat respectfully, "I am sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man. I met him a few times, but I promise you, his killers will face justice." "Thank you," Daisy said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you." "Just doing my job, madam," Garrett said. "Now, I am going to need you to come to Denver and give a formal statement. The trial will probably be in a few months, and you will need to testify. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes," Daisy said without hesitation. "I will do whatever it takes." "Good. I will send word when we need you. In the meantime, stay close. And Mr. Frost, thank you for protecting her. Took guts to stand up to Chambers." "It was the right thing to do," Xavier said simply. Garrett nodded approvingly, then mounted his horse and led his deputies and prisoners away, leaving the ranch suddenly, almost eerily quiet. Daisy and Xavier stood on the porch, watching them go, hardly able to believe it was over. Then, suddenly, Daisy was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed with relief. Xavier wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "It is really over." "I cannot believe it," she said against his chest. "I thought we were going to die. I thought they were going to kill us all." "But they did not," Xavier said. "We made it. You made it." She pulled back to look at him and saw that his face was streaked with soot and blood from a cut on his cheek she had not noticed before. "You are hurt," she said, touching the wound gently. "It is nothing," he said, catching her hand and holding it. "Daisy, about what I said last night." "You meant it?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "Every word," he said. "I love you. I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but I love you." "I love you too," she said, and saying the words felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I love you, Xavier Frost." He kissed her then, right there on the porch in the morning sunlight, and it felt like a promise of safety, of love, of a future that she had thought was lost forever. The next few months were a whirlwind. True to his word, Marshal Garrett summoned Daisy to Denver to give her statement. Xavier went with her, refusing to let her make the journey alone. The trial of Silas Chambers and his men was the biggest news in Colorado that year. The courtroom was packed every day with people eager to see the powerful mining magnate brought to justice. Daisy testified, telling the jury exactly what she had seen the night her father was murdered. It was difficult, reliving that terrible night, but Xavier was there in the courtroom every day, and whenever she felt her courage faltering, she would look at him and draw strength from his steady presence. Ray Blackwell testified as well, detailing years of illegal activities orchestrated by Chambers. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Chambers was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Dutch and the other men directly involved in Jacob Lancaster's murder were sentenced to hang. Justice, at last. After the trial, Daisy had to deal with the practical matters of settling her father's estate. The silver claim was legally hers, and it turned out to be worth more than her father had ever realized. A mining company offered to buy it from her for a substantial sum, enough that she would never have to worry about money again. But money was not what mattered to Daisy. What mattered was the future she was building with Xavier. They were married in Julesburg 3 months after Chambers' trial, in a small ceremony at the church with Xavier's ranch hands and a few townspeople in attendance. Daisy wore a simple white dress and Xavier wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Xavier kissed her, Daisy felt a joy she had thought she would never experience again. They honeymooned at the ranch, which Daisy now thought of as home. She took over running the household and threw herself into learning about ranch life. She learned to ride, to tend the animals, to manage the accounts. Xavier was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, and he never made her feel less capable because she was still learning. Their first year of marriage was blissfully happy. They worked side by side during the day and fell asleep in each other's arms at night. Daisy found that she loved the rhythm of ranch life, the hard work and the simple pleasures. She planted a garden, learned to can vegetables for the winter, and even tried her hand at sewing clothes. Xavier, for his part, was a devoted husband. He was attentive and affectionate, always making sure Daisy knew how much he loved her. He would bring her wildflowers he found while riding the range, or surprise her with a new book from the general store in town. He made her laugh, he held her when she cried on the anniversary of her father's death, and he made her feel cherished every single day. A year and a half after their wedding, Daisy discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after dinner when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and his face lit up with joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Daisy asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy?" Xavier said, pulling her into his arms. "Daisy, I'm the happiest man alive. I love you, and I love this baby already, and I cannot wait to meet him or her." The pregnancy was not easy. Daisy suffered from terrible morning sickness in the beginning, and toward the end, she was so uncomfortable she could barely sleep. But Xavier was wonderful through it all, taking over more of the household chores, bringing her tea and crackers when she was nauseous, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of the day. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1880, after a long and difficult labor. Xavier stayed with Daisy the whole time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When the midwife finally placed the squalling, red-faced baby in Daisy's arms, she burst into tears. "He is perfect," she whispered, looking down at the tiny face. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we call him?" Xavier asked, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one finger. Daisy thought for a moment. "Jacob," she said, "after my father, Jacob Frost." Xavier's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Jacob Frost," he repeated. "I like that. I like that very much." Little Jacob was a happy, healthy baby, and he brought even more joy into their lives. Xavier was a natural father, patient and gentle, and he doted on his son. Daisy would often find him in the nursery late at night, just watching Jacob sleep, a look of wonder on his face. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with Daisy's dark hair and Xavier's blue eyes. They named her Emily, and she was as sweet-tempered as her brother was rambunctious. Jacob, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, from feeding her to changing her diapers. The ranch prospered. With Daisy's inheritance from her father's claim, they were able to expand, buying more land and more cattle. Xavier hired additional hands, and the ranch became one of the most successful in the area. But despite their growing wealth, they remained humble and hard-working, never forgetting where they had come from. Daisy often thought about the weeks she had spent hiding in barns, terrified and alone. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night, disoriented, thinking she was back in that first barn, and then Xavier would stir beside her and pull her close, and she would remember that she was safe, that she was home, that she was loved. On the 5th anniversary of the day Xavier had found her in his barn, Daisy woke early and slipped out of bed. She pulled on a robe and walked out to the barn, the very place where her new life had truly begun. It was a peaceful morning, the sun just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She stood in the spot where she had been hiding that day, remembering her fear, her desperation, her certainty that she would never be safe again. "What are you doing out here?" Xavier's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, fully dressed, a gentle smile on his face. "Remembering," she said. 5 years ago today, you found me here. You saved my life." Xavier walked over to her and took her hands. "You saved your own life," he said. "You survived for weeks on your own. All I did was give you a place to rest. You gave me so much more than that. Daisy said. "You gave me hope. You gave me love. You gave me a future. Xavier, I know I do not say this enough, but thank you. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for loving me." "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done," Xavier said, pulling her close, "and I will keep doing it for the rest of my life." They stood together in the barn, holding each other as the sun rose, two people who had found each other in the darkest of times and built a life full of light and love. Years passed and their family continued to grow. Another son, Samuel, was born when Jacob was 7 and Emily was 5. Then, twin girls, Sarah and Sophie, arrived 3 years after that, causing delighted chaos in the Frost household. The ranch house, which had once seemed so spacious, became filled with the sounds of children laughing, playing, and occasionally arguing. Jacob grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. From an early age, he was out riding with Xavier, learning everything there was to know about ranching. Emily was quieter, more studious, and she loved to read. Daisy taught her letters and numbers, and they would spend hours together going through books. Samuel was adventurous and mischievous, always getting into some kind of trouble, but with such charm that it was impossible to stay angry with him. The twins, Sarah and Sophie, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing a bond that mystified and delighted everyone. The ranch became a hub of activity. Xavier and Daisy were known throughout the territory as fair employers and good neighbors. They hosted barn dances and harvest celebrations, and their home was always open to those in need. More than once, Daisy found herself offering shelter to someone in trouble, remembering all too well what it was like to be desperate and afraid. When Jacob was 18, a young woman named Margaret came to work at the ranch as a cook's assistant. She was shy and hard-working, and Daisy noticed the way Jacob's eyes followed her around. It reminded her so much of the early days with Xavier that it made her heart ache with nostalgia. She gently encouraged the romance, and by the following year, Jacob and Margaret were engaged. The wedding was a grand affair, with people coming from all over Colorado to celebrate. Daisy watched her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, and she thought about how life had a way of coming full circle. She had lost her father, but she had gained a family. She had been hunted and afraid, but she had found safety and love. And now, her son was beginning his own journey, and she could not be happier for him. As the years went by, Xavier's hair turned gray, and Daisy noticed fine lines forming around her eyes. They were growing older together, and there was something deeply comforting about that. They had weathered storms together, literal and metaphorical, and their love had only grown stronger. One evening, when they were both in their 60s and the children were all grown with families of their own, Daisy and Xavier sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset just as they had done countless times before. "Do you remember the day I found you in the barn?" Xavier asked, his hand clasped in hers. "How could I forget?" Daisy said. "It was the day my life changed forever." "Mine too," Xavier said. "I did not know it then, but finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You have given me a life beyond anything I ever dreamed of." "We gave each other that life," Daisy corrected gently. "I was lost and you found me. But you were alone and I gave you a family. We saved each other, Xavier." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I love you, Daisy Frost. I have loved you from the moment I saw you in my barn, terrified but refusing to give up, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Daisy said, her voice thick with emotion. "You told me that hiding was over, and you were right. With you, I never had to hide again. You showed me what it means to truly live." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant shades of red and orange. Around them, the ranch they had built together stood as a testament to their love, their hard work, and their unwavering faith in each other. From the barn came the sound of horses nickering, a sound that had become the soundtrack of their lives. Grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside the house, their children and their spouses were preparing dinner, continuing the traditions that Daisy and Xavier had started all those years ago. It had been a long journey from that terrifying night when Daisy had watched her father die and fled into the darkness. She had been so young, so scared, so certain that her life was over, but she had survived. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who had seen past her fear to the strength beneath. Together, they had built not just a ranch, but a legacy. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Xavier helped Daisy to her feet, and they walked into their home hand in hand. The house was warm and filled with the people they loved most in the world. Their eldest son, Jacob, was telling a story about a calf he had helped deliver that morning. Emily was reading to her own daughter, continuing the love of books that Daisy had passed down to her. Samuel was arm wrestling with his teenage son, both of them laughing. The twins were helping their mother prepare dessert, moving around the kitchen in perfect synchronization. This was their life. This was the family they had created. This was the future they had fought for on that day when Silas Chambers and his men had come to take it all away. Daisy caught Xavier's eye across the crowded room, and he smiled at her, that same gentle, loving smile he had given her on the morning he found her in his barn. It was a smile that said, "I see you. I know you. I love you." It was a smile that had sustained her through the darkest times and illuminated the brightest moments. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or retired to bed, Daisy and Xavier lay together in their room, the same room where they had shared their first kiss, where their children had been born, where they had celebrated joys and weathered sorrows. "No regrets?" Xavier asked softly in the darkness. "Not a single one," Daisy replied. "Well, except maybe that I did not trust you sooner. I could have saved us both a lot of worry." Xavier chuckled. "You were smart to be cautious. The world is a dangerous place, especially for a woman alone." "I was not alone," Daisy said. "Not really. Even in those weeks when I was hiding, even when I thought I had no one, I think somewhere deep down I knew that I would find my way. And I found my way to you." "We found each other," Xavier corrected, echoing her words from earlier. "And I thank God for it every single day." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had built a life together that exceeded their wildest dreams. The ranch continued to thrive under Jacob's management, with Xavier serving as an advisor, but stepping back from the day-to-day operations. Daisy spent her time with her grandchildren, teaching them to read and sharing stories of the old days. Sometimes she would tell them about their grandfather, Jacob Lancaster, the man they were named after, and how he had been brave and kind and had died standing up for what was right. She told them about the weeks she spent hiding, though she kept the details appropriate for young ears. She wanted them to understand that sometimes life could be hard, that sometimes you had to be brave even when you were terrified, and that goodness and justice could prevail if you held on long enough. But mostly, she told them about love, about how she had met their grandfather Xavier in a barn, and how he had offered her safety and kindness when she needed it most, about how they had fallen in love during the darkest time of her life, and how that love had sustained them through everything that came after. The grandchildren would listen, wide-eyed, as if hearing a fairy tale, and in a way, it was a fairy tale, though one grounded in the harsh realities of the Wild West. It was a story of survival, of justice, of finding love in unexpected places, and of building a family that would last for generations. As Daisy entered her 70s, her health began to fail. She developed a persistent cough that would not go away, and she grew weaker despite Xavier's best efforts to care for her. The doctor came from town and told them gently that her lungs were failing, probably damaged from all those weeks she had spent sleeping in damp, dusty barns so many years ago. "How long?" Xavier asked, his voice breaking. "A few months, maybe less," the doctor said. "I'm sorry. Make her comfortable. Make sure she knows she is loved." Xavier did both. He barely left Daisy's side in those final months. Their children visited often, and the house was filled with grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, all coming to say goodbye to the matriarch of the Frost family. Daisy faced her death with the same courage she had faced everything else in her life. She was not afraid. She had lived a full, rich life, far beyond anything she had imagined possible on that terrible night when her father died. She had been loved, and she had loved in return, and she was at peace. On a warm spring morning, with the scent of wildflowers drifting through the open window, Daisy woke to find Xavier sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, just as he had done every day for the past 45 years. "Good morning, my love," he said softly. Good morning, she whispered. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were clear. It is a beautiful day. It is, Xavier agreed. Do you remember what day it is? Daisy thought for a moment. Is it the anniversary? 45 years ago today I found you in my barn, Xavier said, his voice thick with emotion. 45 years since you changed my life forever. Daisy smiled. Hiding was over, she said. You told me hiding was over, and you were right. I never had to hide again. You made sure of that. I wish I could have given you more time, Xavier said, tears running down his weathered face. I wish I could have protected you from this. You gave me everything, Daisy said firmly, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had left. You gave me a lifetime of love, a family, a home, everything I ever wanted. Do not you dare regret a single moment, Xavier Frost. We had more happiness than most people ever dream of. I love you, Xavier said, his voice breaking. I love you so much. I love you too, Daisy said, and I always will. Even when I'm gone, my love will still be here. In this ranch, in our children, in everything we built together. You will never truly lose me. They sat together in the morning light, hands clasped, as they had sat so many times before. Around them, the ranch awakened to a new day. Horses whinnied in the barn, the same barn where their story had begun. Children played in the yard, their laughter a reminder of the legacy Daisy and Xavier had created. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Daisy's breathing grew shallow. Xavier held her hand and spoke to her softly, telling her about all the moments they had shared, all the joy she had brought him, all the ways she had made his life better. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for letting me find you. Thank you for loving me. Daisy's eyes fluttered open one last time. She looked at Xavier, and her face softened with love. Thank you for telling me hiding was over, she said, her voice barely audible. Thank you for giving me a life. And then, peacefully, surrounded by love and memories and the life she had built, Daisy Lancaster Frost closed her eyes for the last time. Xavier sat with her for a long while after she was gone, still holding her hand, unwilling to let go. He had known this day would come, but knowing it and experiencing it were two very different things. The love of his life, his partner, his best friend, was gone, and the world felt suddenly empty. But as he sat there, he became aware of the sounds around him. His son Jacob was in the yard, talking to one of the hands about which pasture to move the cattle to. His daughter Emily was in the kitchen, her voice drifting through the house as she organized lunch for the family. His grandchildren were playing, their laughter bright and joyful. Daisy was gone, but her legacy remained. Everything she had touched, everyone she had loved, carried a part of her forward. The ranch she had helped build stood strong. The family she had nurtured continued to grow. The love she had given so freely had multiplied and spread through generations. Xavier lived for 5 more years after Daisy's death, long enough to see 2 more great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the ranch would continue to thrive, long enough to be certain that the family he and Daisy had created would endure. When he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep on a cold winter night, his family buried him beside Daisy on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but they did not need anything more elaborate. Their legacy was not in stone, but in the land they had worked, the family they had raised, and the love they had shared. Years turned into decades, and the story of Xavier and Daisy became a family legend, passed down from generation to generation. Great-grandchildren who had never met them grew up hearing about the cowboy who had found a desperate woman hiding in his barn and told her that hiding was over. They heard about the love that had blossomed in the midst of danger, about the courage it took to stand up to powerful men, about the life that had been built on a foundation of trust and devotion. The ranch remained in the Frost family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, but never forgetting the 2 people who had started it all. The barn where Xavier had first found Daisy was maintained and preserved, even as newer, more modern buildings were constructed around it. It stood as a monument to the day that 2 lives had intersected and changed forever. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the Colorado wind whispered through the grass, when the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and pink, when the air smelled of wildflowers and fresh hay, It almost seemed possible to see them. Two figures standing on the porch of the ranch house, hand in hand, watching over the land and the family they had created, their love as eternal as the mountains that rose in the distance, their story a testament to the power of courage, hope, and love in the wildest of places and the darkest of times. The hiding was over, and in its place was a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. Daisy Lancaster had run into the darkness fleeing for her life, but she had found Xavier Frost, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. Their story was one of survival and justice, but most of all, it was a story of love, the kind of deep, abiding love that transcends time and circumstance, the kind of love that builds families and futures and leaves the world better than it found it. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.